Hello and welcome. You may remember that I was talking about 3D modeling a library and all the assets for it. So in this episode, we're using all the great tools that we've learned so far, both mesh modeling tools and sculpting tools, in order to 3D model a hand. And this hand will be used to create a sculpture for this library. So the goal of this is, in this episode, we're going to 3D model the hand in a neutral position so that in another episode, I can show you how to bake your sculpt, which will allow you to make a displacement map and a normal map and have good topology for rigging. So once we have this hand ready to be detailed with its normal map and displacement map with all of the beautiful sculpting details we add to it, at that point we can rig it because the topology will be nice, baked down to a simplified version. And once we bake it down, we can shape the hand in an interesting position so that we can use it for a sculpture. The nice thing about rigging it is that you can get multiple sculptures from one model of one hand. So I like to do that. And then I'll probably texture it in some kind of metallic texture so that it looks like it was made out of metal. I think that could look nice. So I will be 3D modeling my hand today, and I will be using my hand as a reference. I strongly suggest you use a reference yourself. If you're 3D modeling today, you can 3D model whatever you want, but if you're 3D modeling a hand, it really helps to look at your own because you can see how your hand moves. You can see the bones and the ligaments and the muscles a little bit just by looking at your hand, and think about the anatomy of your hand while you're 3D modeling it, because I think that's really helpful. And it also is helpful when you think of rigging later on when you create that base mesh for your hand before adding all the subdivision levels. But let's just go ahead and do it and jump into Cinema 4D and have a nice, fun, relaxing meditation-like time 3D modeling. So the first thing that I'd like to do is just switch over into standard mode now if you aren't already in that mode. And now with that done, I'm going to go ahead and use the pen tool, or the polygon pen rather. I'll use the middle mouse button to come into the 4 views, and I'm going to focus on the top view for right now. So I'm going to look at my hand while I do this. And I'm just going to create the basic shape with the polygon pen. And I want to keep this in a relatively neutral position so that if we want to rig this hand later, we can. And that's a possibility. And it's good to start with the larger shapes and the larger forms first. Before getting into the details. So we really want to hold off from the details for as long as we can. So this is the base of our hand. And now we need to make some cuts to make the placement for the fingers and the knuckles. So you can see that this is the base of the hand here, this area. That's what we've done. We need to use the knife tool, or MK. The hotkey for that is right here. And we're going to go ahead and make some cuts in here. So, and you can always hit undo if you feel like that wasn't the correct position. And you can kind of see where the ligaments and bones are in your hand. And if we ever want to rig this, it's good to think of how an actual hand moves and where the actual bones are. And while you're thinking about that, think of where to place the loops so that it'll be easier to rig. So I like to think of actual anatomy when I'm thinking of where to place polygons and loops and how to do the topology if we're going to rig this later. That's always how I've thought of it myself. And we can always make more adjustments as we go. Now we need to extrude. So we've gone over the extrude tool before. The hotkey for extrude is MT. And I'm just going to go into the perspective view and extrude out to make sure that's going in the right direction. So that's the pinky. So check your proportions, look at your hand again. Everyone's hand is a little bit different. So your model doesn't need to look like mine. It can be whatever you want it to be. You know, this is your chance to be creative and do your own thing. And I find it helps sometimes to focus on the proportions going one direction before you get into the proportions in all three axes. So that's why I'm really focusing on the top view now. But everyone 3D models a little bit different. So just because I'm doing it this way, it doesn't mean that whenever you're 3D modeling something, this is the one and only right way to do it. You can try out different methods, come up with your own workflow if you want. Now this finger just feels a little bit long to me, so I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. I'll rotate this guy around a little bit. And I'm using the T hotkey just to scale in that top edge a little bit, so we're just extruding the edges. I'm going to double check my proportions again because that's really important to me to have this be proportionally correct. At least according to my own hand. Now I'm going to extrude this edge. Move it up a little bit, scale it in. The thumb is a little bit of a different shape, I feel like, than the other fingers. It almost comes up to the first knuckle right there. And if we want to go ahead and make the wrist, I can go ahead and do that. So I'm selecting those and then I'm holding Control and dragging my mouse over those top edges so that I can extrude this on down. I'm holding Control, but I think I'll use MT in order to extrude this out instead. So that's extrude. Hotkey for extrude. And we have this very basic shape of a hand, which is great. And now I want to look at this from this point of view. It also helps to look at your hand from the side to start imagining how it's going to look once we extrude this so that it's 3D. It's easiest to make changes while the shapes are larger. I think that what I want to do is start cutting out some more polygons so that this is easier to shape and to 3D model. So I'm actually going to use the cutting tool here. And right now I'm thinking about both the top and the bottom of the hand and how it moves to start considering where to place these and rigging it. There's a pretty large muscle here that moves with the thumb that's shaped a little bit more like this. So I'm just going to move the points down a little bit to try to get a little bit more of that shape on at least the bottom of the hand. So this would be more of like for the palm side, there's this muscle here. This muscle here in your hand. It's hard to line up with the camera. Okay, so there we go. We've got that basic shape. And it's helpful to also start thinking about where the knuckles would be in the hand. And just doing a little bit of placement here. Now the thing that's helpful is we can always slide these edges with the hotkey MO. If you remember us covering the slide, MO is to slide edges once you select them. So if you ever reach a point where something just isn't feeling right to you, you can adjust it. You aren't stuck with it, really. Or you can use that undo button. Both work. I'm going to go ahead and move this down just a little bit. .3D modeling a hand is a little bit more time consuming, but I also find it to be a really rewarding thing to do because it is a little bit more time consuming. And it can be somewhat relaxing to do as well. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this point over here and bring it down a little bit and in. And we've already covered these tools, so it's really fun that we get to finally use a lot of them all together in a project, because a hand is pretty complex. So we're using the mesh modeling tools, but we'll also get to use the sculpting tools. So I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. So there we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and select everything using UF or fill selection. We've gone over that one as well. And then we'll use MT in order to extrude. I have create caps on. I'm going to go into this perspective because this is where sometimes things go wrong. I actually might just turn off caps to see how this is looking on the other side. So this is good. You can see that we don't have any of these edges being extruded too, so that's a good sign. If that's an issue you're running into, you can try using the optimize tool we've gone over in the past to fix that. So I'm going to extrude again, but this time I'm going to create caps so that this is a closed form now that we can see that the extrude is working properly with our topology. And we can even double check by going inside the hand. We have no walls where there shouldn't be walls, so that is good. Now I know this looks pretty square still, and it's not going to be staying that way. I'm going to select this loop here, and we have fit circle. Gone over this tool. We're going to make this a little bit more circular. And I'm just going to reduce the strength a little bit because that was pretty rounded before. And your profile of your arm is a little bit more oval. And we're just getting it close right now, as close as we can as a base form, because we are going to be sculpting off of this. So I'm going to go ahead and use UL. I'm going to select this loop, and we're going to make it elliptical again. You can see that already looks much more like a wrist once it's no longer a perfect square. That really seems to help quite a bit. And I'm not really sure what to expect doing it with this one, but I am curious what happens if I make this a little bit more rounded. I can adjust the strength here a little bit. I want to try that again. So that feels a little bit better to me. So this is the top of the hand. And then the bottom is a little bit more, I don't know what the word is for it, but it comes in a little bit more. So I'm just going to lift these up. And the more you look at your hand as a reference, the better. Because getting the form really close now, I know I'm repeating myself, but it really makes it easier later. Sometimes I see people when they're doing topology for rigging later on, they make the knuckles be inset. So I just use the inset tool. We've gone over the inset. The hotkey for that is MW. They make it inset a little bit just because it has more points, so it holds its shape a little bit more when the hand bends, and you want the knuckles to keep that shape when the hand bends, and the topology helps with that when you do that sometimes. So I'm just gonna leave that there. Now we do need to adjust these fingers a little bit. So Just going to drop these down a little bit. The thumb is just a little bit naturally lower in a neutral position than the fingers. I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. I'll rotate it a little bit this way. Going to bring these up a little bit. I'm just going to angle them. This part of the hand, the knuckles just seem like they're slightly higher, so I'm going to drop these down a little bit. It's good to pay attention to those little details as much as you can. Even though I'm trying to keep my hand mostly straight as I'm doing this. Now there's a lot of bending that happens right here at the wrist, and there's also these interesting kind of wrinkles on your wrist here, and I just want to give that more loops. So I'm going to use ML, the hotkey, just so that I can give this a little bit more structure there. At this point, our base mesh is looking really good. It looks like something we could rig. It's nice and low poly, so it would be a great base for adding additional levels to our sculpt. Something really important to do before we begin that is to actually go ahead and use mesh checking to make sure that there's no errors with our mesh. I've made the mistake of not doing that before I start sculpting on a mesh, and then I find that I have to undo all the sculpting layers and start over with the sculpting phase to fix the base mesh. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do that. We've gone over mesh checking in the past, that tool. If you want to learn more about that, I'll leave a link to that below. And then that should help you know how to solve different problems you may find in your mesh that could show up while you're 3D modeling. So here we are, we have our hand, and we can find our mesh checking if we click on this little gear icon right here and click on mesh checking. Now here we can turn this on, and you'll see that you have all these different types of errors. Mine's going to highlight red because these are not planar polygons. I'm not really concerned about that. In this case, I'm fine with that. So we can look at these other options here. Complex pulls, we have 11 of those. I'm not concerned about these at this moment either, because I think they'll subdivide fine and it'll work out fine for sculpting and rigging in the long run. Something to be careful of is if you have any bad polygons, you really don't want anything that's yellow. I'll tell you the number of errors for each error type. We have 0 triangles, that's good. We don't have any n-gons, that's good. So just double check these before you start sculpting on your mesh, because that'll save you a lot of headaches later. And I know this because I've learned from experience of making past mistakes, so hopefully that saves you some time. Now that we have our sculpting hand basically ready, we can go ahead and switch over to our sculpting mode. There's one more detail that I want to point out to you, is that I added one more loop down here just to give this part a little bit more structure. I might, just to be safe, add another loop right over here, or even in the middle of here. So I'll hold down Shift so that we can snap to the middle and add a loop in the center. And while we're subdividing that, that'll just give us some more detail to work with here. That isn't really needed for rigging it, but it'll be nice for while we're sculpting. So we have that in there, and let's switch over to our sculpting mode. I'm in model mode right now. I'm going to click the subdivide button here, and then I'm going to click it again. And you can begin to see that this is subdividing and becoming a lot more rounded, which is good. Now we're going to really make this detailed eventually. We're going to add in a skin texture and all kinds of fine details in the hand, including around the nails. For right now, we just want to get the base form pretty close. So before we add in all the details, it's good to work with the base shape. So let's take a look at what we have here. I'm going to add another layer up here. And you can see that this layer is on level 1. And I'm going to name this overall form. I'm switching over to my sculpting pen because that's just a lot easier to use, and it'll allow me to use pen pressure as I work. Let's just take a look at this here. So the first thing that I see is that now that we've added in these layers, this thumb has kind of shrunk a little bit, and I'm going to use the grab brush to move it out a little bit more. And I'm going to move this out a little bit more. And this looks pretty close, honestly. So I'm going to add in another subdivision level. And now I'll begin sculpting on top of this. I'm going to hide the lines just so it's easier to see what's happening as I work on this hand. Going to smooth out this edge a little bit and grab the draw brush. So here you can kind of see a little bit of the bone. So I'm going to raise this up just a little bit, and then that bone These are actually your metacarpals in your hand, and they go all the way back down to about the area where your wrist is. So I'm adding in some of that detailing in there. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit because this part of the hand still looks a little too rectangular. And then we also have this part here. The changes that I'm making are really subtle, but they'll be helpful later. And then the thumb area, this needs to come out a little bit more. There's a pretty big muscle right here, at least a large muscle for when you consider the size of a hand. We could even try creating this with the inflate tool. And there's another muscle over here. I'm going to smooth this out just a little bit because that's a little bit too much. So now that I have my mesh subdivided a little bit more, I'm going to add on an additional layer by clicking this button here. And you'll see this one is at level 3. So I'm just going to name this level 3 detail. And at this point, I'm going to start adding in a little bit more of the detail of the muscles in here. I'm going to smooth out the hand right here because that was starting to look a little bit rectangular. So I want to smooth that out. I'm holding Shift. And while I'm working with this, I may want to use the inflate brush because I feel like that's pretty good for adding in the appearance of muscles. I'm holding down Shift again to smooth out this edge. So on your hand, your thumb, there's this area here, and that's a pretty big muscle for your hand. So we're going to go ahead and use the inflate brush and just add in some definition for that muscle there, so it's a little bit more visible. And I try to rotate around the hand to get an idea of how is this looking. And then I want to also add in a little bit over here. And I'm using my own hand as a reference. I'm just going to smooth it out a little bit. And I'll decrease the strength of the smooth. Because I want that to be a little bit more subtle. And then over here, there's a little bit of detail by the fingers. So I'm just going to raise the surface a little bit. It's a very subtle detail here. And I'm continuing to look back at my hand to see how everything's looking. I'm going to look at the top side, and here you can actually see a little bit of your metacarpals. It's a bone that runs through your hand from here to your wrist. And each one of your fingers has a metacarpal. You can look up an image of it online if you want to check out the anatomy of a hand. I'm going to go ahead and draw those in with the draw brush over here. So this surface here would be a little bit raised, and then it would fade back. And you can rotate around the hand to make sure that that's looking okay and looking realistic. Because all these little details are going to come through when we create a displacement in a normal map for our base mesh. So it's good to have them looking right here. Now when I look at the wrist, on my wrist, I'm going to go ahead and grab the inflate brush. You can see a little bit of the bone right here. It comes out a little bit more. And then we'll also check this from the side. And don't hesitate to look at your own wrist and see what it looks like. Your hand might look a little bit different than mine, and that's totally okay, because you should be looking at your own reference when you do this, and you should be looking at your own hand. I think that's really important. And I want to grab the grab brush and just pull this area out here a little bit, because there's a little bit of a muscle that comes out a little bit more than the other area. It's a very subtle surface change, but I want to make sure that I show that in here. And then it goes back in, and right about here near this joint in the pinky, it comes out again. This thumb is becoming a little bit too small here at the top. So I'm referencing my thumb and taking a look at this model, and I'm making subtle changes to it. I really want to pay close attention to these lines around it, similar to when you're sketching something or someone. You really want to pay close attention to the details, because they matter, and they're what really adds a lot of realism in life to something. So you can see already that's looking like a much more realistic thumb shape than what it was before. And now these fingers look very cartoony. They look very cylindrical. And if you look at your hand, it's not that cylindrical because of the muscles in it. There's some areas that go in a little bit more, like right over here, and some that go out a little bit more. So it's really important to pay attention to those really subtle changes in form, and then to do your best to replicate that here in 3D. So I'm constantly looking back and forth between my screen and my hand. It's a very similar exercise to sketching, because when you sketch, you're constantly looking back and forth between your hand or the whatever you're sketching and the page. But here we are using a screen instead, but the method is the same. And the more you sketch, the better you get at 3D modeling. I really believe that. One helps the other, because it practices, it teaches you how to really look at what your reference is. I'm going to inflate the thumb a little bit more, because you can see it's really thin here at the bottom, and actually your thumb is a little bit thicker at that point, and it's more muscular at the base. So I'm going to add in some more detail here. I'm going to use the flatten brush because this part of the wrist on my wrist starts to go in a little bit, and I want to replicate that shape. I might use the bracket keys to make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to smooth this out just a little bit because I want it to look realistic. And this part of the wrist seems to go in a little bit more, so I'm just going to maybe hold Control and use inflate, and we're actually going in a little bit, and then I'll smooth it out because it's a subtle change in surface. I'll smooth it out there. I'm going to grab the grab brush again. I feel like the grab brush is really good for making those larger surface changes. So I'm going to pull this area out a little bit more. And if you look at your fingers, they aren't actually this round. They aren't that perfectly round. You might imagine them being very round in your head, and they're pretty round, but they're not a perfect round circle. So I find it helpful to just make some subtle surface changes in here. I'm just moving this surface in a little bit because we want these to look like real hands. This is a sculpture for a library. We want this to look like real hands, like someone sculpted this and was really paying close attention to detail and placing a lot of thought and care into this, because we are the sculptors and we want to show care in our work. So now I'm taking a look at the thumb. That looks pretty good. And this looks quite a lot like my hand. At this point, I want to just take a look at how detailed this mesh is. So it's not super dense yet at this stage. We're still adding in larger shapes. But I think that we will need some more polygons up here to start adding in things like nails to the hands and adding in those finer details and those wrinkles in your hands and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to garage shading, go to my base object, and maybe I will keep on lines just so that we can see how many polygons we have. I'm going to subdivide this again. And I'm going to subdivide it again. For right now, I'm going to work on it on level 4 though. So for this, I'm going to create a new layer. So I'll click the Add Layer button, and now I'm going to choose to call this Layer 4. Level 4 Detail. So at this point, we can start adding in the nails. I'm going to turn off the line so that I can see the mesh a little bit better. So I'm constantly switching back and forth between those two. So just like when you're sketching, when you're 3D modeling, you want to add in the detail, but save it for last. So you do the larger forms first, and then you add in the smaller details. So you can see right now with the flatten brush, it is starting to flatten out the nail. You can also, so right now I have mouse down on. If I have it off, it's not having the same effect. I like to change this to mouse down because it'll remember where you first start drawing, and then it'll make everything go to that plane. So I'm looking at my finger and the shape of my nail. And I want to try doing that again. So that looks better. I'll probably need to adjust its shape and its angle a little bit, but it's a starting point. It just helps us kind of map out where the nail's actually going to be. And the shape of it before we start adding in those little fine details. Once you start feeling comfortable with the brushes, you'll just intuitively have a feel for, I want to use this one will be best for the job. It's not like there's really 100% one right way to go about it. On your thumb, it's facing out a little bit more, so I'm going to go in here and just add in a shape for the thumb nail. So you can see that this isn't perfect. So I'm going to use the grab brush. And now at this point, we can start shaping the nail quite a bit more. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit. So you can see that these nails are pointed a little bit too down, but that's okay because we can just easily grab the surface and lift it up. So it's really nothing to worry about. Everything is very editable. It's like working with clay. And now that I'm looking at this here, I'm seeing that the profile of the finger, I want to actually make some adjustments to. So I'll lift that up a little bit. And lift that up a little bit. I'll smooth this out. So we have the basic placement for the nails at this point. I like to use the pinch and the knife tool in order to add in further details to the nails. So I'll go ahead and get started on doing that. The knife is really good for separating the nail some from the rest of the finger, but this might still be too low poly to get really into that at this point, or it's possible that I just need to increase the strength and it'll look a little bit better. So let's see what happens if I do this. So it just feels too low poly. So for right now, I'm just going to use the pinch tool and I'm just going to pinch this together and define the shape a little bit more. And we can add in the detail with the knife tool a little bit more later. It's okay to hold off from that right now. And I can even use the draw tool to just add a little bit more surface right there. Just build it up a little bit. Because the surface does go up a little bit there. I'll go back to using our pinch brush around here. Adjust the shape of this nail. And then I want to just add a little bit more detail here. So the surface would be a little bit raised here. So this is a really subtle change. You can see my strength is at 3.7%. It's okay to keep these changes low as you're adding in these details. So I'm just raising the surface ever so slightly here. And then I'm going to, again, make some little adjustments with the grab brush. I'm just going to bring this in a little bit. Going to make this a little bit smaller and use the draw tool, not that one. So just want to smooth that out. I've never had super long nails. I mean, I do from time to time, but I've never liked it because I feel like it's hard to do things. I know some people don't mind it at all, but I couldn't imagine 3D modeling with really long nails. I think it'd drive me crazy. Okay, so this is my hand. I'm going to check it again on the other side, check it on both sides. Ooh. I'm going to change this to off. I'm just flattening it just a little bit right there. And then I am a little bit by the wrist as well. I'm going to smooth this. And then I'll grab the grab brush. I'm just going to pull this out a little bit since your arm really isn't a perfect cylinder. So I'll just add a little bit of that curvature in there so that it feels more real. I'll do that a little bit on the other side, but not quite as much. So there we are. Pretty decent hand. Let's go ahead and click on our base mesh again. And increase the subdivision levels. So this is getting quite a bit denser, the subdivision level. And we can give this a try and see if we add in this layer here. I'm going to name this layer level 5. And we're going to try adding in some more details. So let's go ahead and do that. And now in here, I'm going to turn off our lines so that I can see what we're doing again. And I can start adding in some more details now. So this is gonna get fun, because it's fun once you really start to see the form come together. And you can see it's so much easier to pinch these edges of the nail together with the pinch brush once you have just more polygons to work with. And it can be tempting to skip ahead to the polygon count that's higher because it's fun adding in the details, but you really need a good base for the details. It's kind of like baking a cake. If you add frosting on top of a cake that's very poorly done, it's not going to taste good no matter how much frosting you put on top of it. You need to have a good base to your cake. So same thing goes for sculpting. Don't just keep putting on more frosting, hoping that's going to fix the problem. Your cake needs a good foundation to build off of. And that's why we spend so much time on the larger shapes than on the details. because the details don't matter if the larger shapes don't work. Here I'll try using the knife tool now, because now we have more subdivisions. I also just want to smooth out this area around the thumb a little bit. I'm holding shift, and then I'm going to make this nice and small. And we're going to just give this a try, and I'll smooth this out a little bit. Also try pinching this together. And smoothing out that area again. Pinching it together. Smoothing it out again. So you can see that looks a lot more like a nail for your thumb. This part I'm going to smooth out a little bit. It's a little bit more of a smooth, subtle transition along that edge. You can use the draw tool though, just to emphasize that there's that surface change there from nail to your skin. So now the thumb becomes a little bit thinner right here, so I'm just going to pull this in a little bit with the grab brush. So that looks better to me. And then I want this area to come down. Holding control as I pull these areas down a little bit more. Just going to lightly smooth this. That looks better. And we're at a pretty high subdivision level. So we could probably see if we could add in some additional detail here. With the knife tool. So you can see that it's not completely smooth yet, and I think that's just because I don't have enough subdivision, so I'm going to hold off from that detail and keep working on the subdivision level, and I'll just keep working on the nails. But still worth giving it a try and seeing what happens. I try to do all the changes that I can on one subdivision level before going up higher. I sketched a lot of hands in college as an industrial designer, since we had to show how it would be like to work with different products. So we had to illustrate hands in order to show what it would be like, and also the scale of the product in someone's hand. It was a really good tool for that. And 3D modeling a hand doesn't feel all that much different. I'm just adding in this little bit of detail right here that I can see a little bit better now. It's really easy to over-exaggerate things in 3D or under-exaggerate them. So it's a little bit of a push and pull is the process. So now at this point, I'm going to add in another subdivision level, and this is getting up to level 6. So this is how dense level 6 is. Now we don't need it to be any more dense than this. So I'm going to name this level 6 detail. How many subdivisions you can add is really dependent on your computer and what it'll allow you to do. So if your computer can't handle this many polygons, no worries, stick with what you can do on your machine and focus on that. I'm going to start adding in some more details. I want to adjust this a little bit. I might actually go back to level 5. Because I want to adjust this. Because now I'm thinking that didn't look like the correct proportion. And hopefully this looks a bit better. And now we'll go back up to 6 and start sculpting in some of the finer details. Going to start adding in some of these little creases here. Because now we are starting to have the detail to add in those. So it kind of feels like sculpting. I mean, it kind of feels like sketching with the knife brush, just adding in these little details. And another cool thing about this is that you can reduce the strength of different layers. So if you feel like this is too strong, you can take it back a little bit. So if you remember, we were talking about layers and being able to adjust their strength. That's something you can do. I'm going to just go back and add in some more details on level 4. And then I can go back to where we were before. I want to use the knife brush again. I'm going to make this 0.1% strength because I want it to be pretty subtle. Might be too much. Let's try that. I'm going to just draw on some more details right here. And then go back into this with the knife tool. Now I'm using the draw brush a little bit more. The creases up here are a little bit more subtle, so I'm trying to take that into consideration. So the cool thing about this is now if I decide these wrinkles are too much and I smooth it out, if I smooth out on this level, I'm only affecting, if I smooth out on this layer, I'm only affecting this layer. So that's really helpful. So that'll just allow me to add, to just adjust the details on only this layer. Okay, so at this point, I've added in the main creases, but we still need to add in some finer, small skin texture to it. So I like to actually do this another way. If we switch to our repeat brush and we open up our asset browser, we can go ahead and take a look in our presets folder under sketch sculpting presets, and then within our sculpting presets there's a texture folder. There's a lot of folders inside of folders, but bear with me. There's an organic folder over here, and in here you'll find skin that looks more like a person's skin, and that's what we're going to want to use for our repeat brush. And we're going to drag and drop this into the image. So now with that done, you can see that that's a little bit too intense of a skin texture. So we'll have to adjust our settings a little bit, make it really nice and subtle like that. And we can get a feel for what looks right. I think we can see the texture a little bit more over the knuckles. We can add them here. So the thing that's really nice about this is that it makes your model look a little bit less plasticky, because without that skin texture it looks kind of plasticky and fake and very 3D, but then once you start adding this in, it looks a lot better. And it doesn't have to be everywhere, it just has to be in enough places where it feels like the texture's everywhere. So it's a little bit of an optical illusion. I did not mean to do that there. So I'm focusing in on here. It also helps some of those larger creases feel a little bit more real, I feel like. Because there's this finer, more detailed texture there. And it's okay, again, to go back in here and smooth out some areas if it feels like too much. The smooth brush is very useful. I feel like this upper part of the hand, it just doesn't usually have as much texture. It's a little bit smoother. I'm going to add in some finer details down here by the thumb with the knife brush. And then I'll go back in here with the skin texture used on the repeat brush. And it's good to back up. If anything feels like too much, you can change it. So you aren't stuck with anything you've done. And that's partially why it's so good to have all these different layers, is because it allows you to change your mind at any point. You can remove a detail, you can add a detail. You have options. So I want to take another look at these nails here, honestly, because I think that they need some more work. I might try turning on the modifiers here and turning on the smooth for when I use this. And then try doing that again because I think it could come out a little bit better. Maybe we need more smoothing. All right. And then we'll grab our pinch brush here. And we'll pinch it together. And I'll grab this over here. Just move it in a little bit. See, this is so much easier now that we have more detail here. But what we had sculpted before is still a really great base for this shape. So I'm still glad that we added in that initial form for us to add details on top of. I'm going to pinch this together to make the nail a little bit more defined. You can see that I accidentally started drawing on this finger, so I'm going to try doing that again. And only drawing on this finger, I'm going to go here. Alrighty. And I'm going to pinch this together up here too. I'm lowering that down and smoothing it out. I'm going to lower this down. And then I'll use this tool over here. I'm just gonna smooth it out a little bit. And then I'm going to pinch it with the pinch brush, of course. And then I'll use the grab brush to make those larger shape changes that we need to do. I kind of like how that nail blends back a little bit more. I'm going to grab the grab brush. Adjust the surface. So I realized there's one more change that I want to make, actually on the first level, or maybe even on level 0. You'll see that the arm looks pretty straight, but I want it to actually have a little bit of a more curved form. It looks pretty realistic. I'm pretty pleased with it. Next, we're going to focus more on how to bake this down so that we get a displacement texture and a normal map that we can use. This will become very low poly at that point so that it'll become a good topology to rig. I hope you'll join me for that here on Ambient 3D Animations. Happy 3D modeling. Hope to see you here again next time.